Warren Buffett has said that a house is not necessarily a good investment, that the true cost of owning one, when you account for maintenance, taxes, insurance, and the opportunity cost of the capital tied up in it, is higher than most people ever sit down to calculate honestly. It took me until I was 73 years old, sitting in an empty living room on the last afternoon before closing, to understand that what I had never calculated honestly was not the financial cost of my house, but the cost of leaving it. My name is Clarence. I am 78 years old. And the 5 things I'm going to tell you today are the things I wish someone had told me before I sold the home my wife Eleanor and I had lived in for 31 years. I spent my career as a high school principal in Western Tennessee, 34 years in public education, the last 18 as a principal at the same school where I had begun as a history teacher. Eleanor was a registered nurse. We bought our house in 1987, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street with a large backyard where our 3 children grew up, and we paid it off in 2006 and lived in it mortgage-free for 17 years before Eleanor passed away in the spring of 2021. After she died, I was alone in a 4-bedroom house, and the practical argument for selling was so straightforward that I made the decision in a state of grief that I did not recognize as grief at the time because it presented itself as logic. That is where the first lesson begins. The first thing I wish I had known was the true weight of the emotional cost of selling a family home, and more specifically, the danger of making an irreversible financial decision in the immediate aftermath of loss before that weight has had time to settle into something you can actually feel and measure. I made the decision to sell 11 months after Eleanor died. I told myself and everyone around me that I had given it a full year, that I had been patient and deliberate, that the decision was practical and sound. What I know now that I did not know then is that 11 months is not long enough. Not because there is a correct amount of time, but because I was still moving through the early stages of a grief that reorganizes how you understand your own life. And I made a permanent decision about where I would live the rest of that life before the reorganization was complete. The house sold in 3 weeks in a strong market. The closing was in September of 2022. I stood in that empty living room on the last afternoon and looked at the wall where Eleanor's photographs had hung for 20 years, and I understood in that moment with a clarity I had not had at any point during the selling process that I was not selling a house. I was closing a chapter of my life that I had not finished reading. There is no financial advice I can give you about this. The only advice I have is practical and plain. If you have lost a spouse and you are thinking about selling your home in the months that follow, wait longer than you think you need to wait. The decision will still be available to you in 2 years. The home you sell in the first year cannot be unsold. The second thing I wish I had known was the true transaction cost of selling a home, which is substantially higher than the number most people carry in their heads when they are thinking about the proceeds from a sale. I knew that real estate agent commissions existed. I knew they were a percentage of the sale price. What I had not done before I listed the house was sit down and add up every cost associated with the transaction from listing to close and subtract that number from my expected proceeds before I made any downstream financial plans based on those proceeds. The commissions on my sale were 5% of the sale price. The home sold for $380,000, which meant the commission alone was $19,000. On top of that were closing costs, title insurance, transfer taxes, a pre-sale inspection that revealed a roofing issue I had not known about, which cost $4,200 to address before listing, staging costs, and the cost of moving and storing the contents of a 4-bedroom house that I had accumulated over 31 years. When I added every cost from the moment I decided to sell to the moment the proceeds hit my account, the total transaction cost was just over $31,000, more than 8% of the sale price. I had planned my finances around a net proceeds figure that was $31,000 higher than the number I actually received. That gap required adjustments I had not anticipated and would not have needed to make if I had run the full cost calculation before I began. The third thing I wish I had known, and this one is purely financial and entirely correctable with one conversation with an accountant before you list, is the capital gains exclusion rules for a primary residence sale, and specifically the conditions under which those rules apply in full versus in a reduced or forfeited form. Under current federal tax law, a single filer can exclude up to $250,000 of capital gain on the sale of a primary residence, and a married couple filing jointly can exclude up to $500,000, provided the home has been used as a primary residence for at least 2 of the 5 years preceding the sale. I knew this rule existed in a general sense. What I did not know was that it applied to me as a single filer at the lower $250,000 limit rather than the $500,000 limit, because Eleanor had died before the sale and I was filing as an individual. My home had appreciated significantly over 31 years of ownership. My adjusted cost basis, the purchase price plus the cost of improvements over the decades, was substantially lower than the sale price, which meant the capital gain on the sale was real and meaningful. With the $250,000 single filer exclusion applied, a portion of my gain remained taxable. I paid federal capital gains tax on that amount, which was a number I had not factored into my financial plan because I had been thinking of the exclusion in the $500,000 married couple terms that had applied to Eleanor and me for the entirety of our ownership. The difference between what I had mentally planned for and what I actually paid in taxes was significant enough that I would have made different decisions about the timing of the sale and the downstream use of the proceeds if I had understood the exclusion correctly before I listed the house. The fourth thing I wish I had known is the one I find hardest to tell, because it requires me to say plainly that I made a decision I was not ready to make and paid for it in a currency that does not appear on any financial statement. After I sold the house in September of 2022, I moved into a 2-bedroom condominium in a retirement community about 12 miles from the neighborhood where I had lived for 31 years. I chose it because it was practical. Lower maintenance, a community of people in a similar life stage, a size that felt appropriate for one person. I signed a 2-year lease in October of 2022, 13 months after Eleanor had died. By the spring of 2023, I understood that I had moved too quickly and chosen the wrong place for reasons I had not examined carefully enough before committing. The condominium was not wrong because it was a condominium. It was wrong because I had chosen it in a state of motion, selling, moving, settling, organizing, that kept me busy enough not to feel what I was feeling, and when the motion stopped and I was sitting in a correctly sized, well-appointed, practically sensible apartment, I felt more alone than I had felt at any point in the previous 2 years. The neighborhood I had left was the neighborhood where my children had grown up, where my neighbors of 20 years still lived, where Eleanor's friends still walked the same streets they had walked when she was alive. I had traded proximity to that continuity for practicality, and I had done it before I knew how much that continuity was worth to me. I am not telling you that downsizing is wrong, or that retirement communities are wrong, or that staying in a large house alone is the right answer. I am telling you that the decision about where you live in the years after a significant loss deserves the same patience I described in the first lesson. More time than you think you need in a state of mind that is as settled as it can be before you commit to a change you will live inside every day. The fifth thing I wish I had known, and the one that has the most practical and long-term financial weight of anything on this list, is the importance of choosing your next home with the health needs of your later years as a primary criterion rather than a secondary one. When I chose my condominium, I thought about size, cost, maintenance burden, and community. I did not think seriously or specifically about what my physical needs might be at 83 or 87, because at 73 I felt healthy, and the health considerations of a decade into the future felt remote in the way that all remote things feel remote when you are managing the immediate present. What I did not ask before I signed my lease were the questions that now feel obvious to me. Is there an elevator or is the unit on a single floor? What is the distance from the parking area to the front door? And is that distance manageable with a cane or a walker? What is the width of the doorways and the height of the fixtures? Is the bathroom configured in a way that allows for grab bars and accessibility modifications without significant structural work? What is the distance to medical facilities and what is the quality of those facilities? Is there a support infrastructure in the community for residents whose needs increase over time? Or will I face another move in 5 years when those needs arrive? My condominium has a single entrance stair that I manage comfortably today and will not manage as comfortably at 85. The nearest hospital of any size is 22 minutes by car. The bathroom is a standard configuration that would require significant work to make genuinely accessible. None of these facts were hidden from me when I signed my lease. I simply did not weight them heavily enough because I was thinking about where I wanted to live at 73 rather than where I would need to live at 83, and those are not always the same place. I am 78 years old. I sold a home I had lived in for 31 years in the year after my wife died, and I made 5 mistakes in that process that I have described to you today. The emotional cost of moving too quickly, the transaction costs I had not fully calculated, the capital gains rules I had not fully understood, the new home I chose before I was ready, the health needs of later years I had not weighted heavily enough. None of these mistakes was the result of carelessness or stupidity. Each one was the result of making a significant and permanent decision in a moment when I was managing more than I was fully aware I was managing. If you are approaching the decision to sell your home in retirement, whether because a spouse has died, because the house has become too large, because the finances make downsizing look attractive, or because the spring market is making the number in your head feel very real and very accessible, I would ask you to take these 5 things with you before you call the agent, not to talk you out of it. Selling your home in retirement may be exactly the right decision. It may be the most practical and financially sound move available to you. I only want you to make it with the full picture in front of you, rather than the partial one I was working from, because the decisions you make about where you live in these years are the ones you will live inside every single day for whatever time you have remaining, and they deserve more than the logic that presents itself most easily in a difficult moment.